welcome everybody to today's installment of Lunch with Lacey. This is part 3 of 4 in a series. The first one was commitment to compliance and making a plan. The second was documenting your efforts to comply. And today is selling instruments and bows, sharing species information with buyers. And we have presenting Lynn Hannings and Brianna Goldberg, I think, will be presenting as well. And with that, before I start, I should mention, since this is going to be going out, these are recorded and they'll be online for the general public to access. So we want to make sure that we are clear that this is not a substitute for legal advice on any of these questions. And also, we're probably going to have mostly going to be questions and answers. So be aware that whatever you say is going to be for public consumption, not just within our organization. Okay, that's it for me. So, Lynn, it's all yours. Thank you.
Yes, hi. I think I'd like to just start out answering a few questions that popped up at the last Lunch with Lacey. I'm having a difficult time getting answers to our questions because of USDA and APHIS and also the lobbyists who are with the International Timber Trade Organization, Timber Products Organization, are all very, very busy with the changeover of our administration here in the United States. I can only imagine how busy they are and how crazy a time this must be for them. But they will get back to me with answers. The questions that were asked that I have answers for, I think are interesting answers. First off, for Andrew Dipper, there was no response to the AI research of species or countries of harvest info. So that question is still on hold. Ute, I think you were the one who was talking about the interstate sales. So let's use, for example, somebody in Utah who wants to buy wood from a wood dealer in Vermont. If that's the case, that's fine. And the information on those species and the harvest information is required, but there's no paperwork required. There's no PPB 505 required for interstate sales. That came from an official source. There was a question from Sue about what in the world is a PPQ for the PPQ 505. And you'll all be interested to know that that stands for Process Performance Qualification. It's a step in the process of validation that evaluates a manufacturing process to make sure that it meets all specifications. So now we're all much better informed. Who knew? Okay, let's get started on this. In our first two Lunch with Lacey talks, we discussed how to do due diligence, what, and how to collect information in our logbooks. It's really important to write that information down, not just do the research, but keep a copy of it so that you can remember 5 years from now or 10 years from now. Today, we're going to talk about how best to share this information with musicians. And this is going to include all natural resources and all bows and instruments, whether newly purchased or something that you've had in inventory for years. Next slide, please. This young boy always makes me start thinking about the use of carbon fiber, fiberglass bows versus that horrible throwaway society that we live in, where people buy bows that aren't worth the cost of a rehair, and they're so poorly made that they don't enhance this little guy's playing either. So I'm not going to go down that off-ramp here today, but I just want you to know I've got some very strong feelings about the wasteful practices that are absolutely unsustainable as we move forward. What I do think we need to do here on this slide is to just inform the clients. And I've divided it up between the student level and the professional level. I usually use around $1,000 as my cutoff personally in my own shop. So for repairs and restoration, I give them an invoice, and on that invoice, I only mention the materials used by whatever common names. I don't include the species and country of harvest. So that's that I changed on this, but I forgot to change it on the slide. It's not the law, but it fits in with the work that we need to do in order to be in sync with the greater musical community and the work of the League of American Orchestras as they work on their Know Your Bow campaign for all musicians. So this is going to be information that would be important for the teachers, for the parents, for the kids when they're no longer kids and they're grown into adults who have to make responsible choices about how to use natural resources. So it's basically for information. So on the repairs and restorations, there's no photo required. If we could just shift to the next slide, you'll see what I'm talking about. So here's your invoice. You don't have to write a book if they're having repairs done or if they're picking up a bow or an instrument. I'll just put down the common names of whatever it is, just so that they get to think about their use of all of these natural resources. And I'll tell you, out of that, many people have donated an extra $5 or $10 because they know that I'm actively involved in organizations that do support conservation for these species. And when they start to realize that they're an important part of that chain, as we know, the whole chain, all the way down to the musicians, they feel more responsible. So again, I'm not asking you to write a book. I'm not asking you to put down the scientific name of the country of harvest, but I do encourage you to just put down, if it's a bow and it has Pernambuco and ebony, that's fine. If it's Ipe and ebony, just jot it down so that they have some idea of what's going on. Next. Now here's where we get to be a little bit more challenging because these are professionals, many of whom are going to be traveling internationally. These are our music community is just an international community, and people are moving around with their instruments and bows all the time. So for repairs and restorations, I do include species and country of harvest on the invoice for materials used, and I do include rehairs on that. Again, no photos are required. This is just to inform them. So if I'm putting on a new tip and I'm using Elferin, I'm going to specify that so that that will help them and help me if they're traveling internationally and need further documentation. When it comes to sales of finished instruments, bows, and accessories, that's when they need a little bit extra documentation. And so we have those documents. That's something that Brianna will be able to share with you in a little while. And photos are required for that. So we're going to, for the professionals, the advanced students and professionals, we do a deeper dive when we're selling them an instrument, whether we've made it, a bow, whether we've made it or whether we're reselling. Whenever it comes to the professional level or the antique level, they will need further documentation. Okay, Brianna, take it away.
Great, thank you. So throughout the next several slides, the one requirement that you will need is the free version of Adobe Acrobat. And in case you don't have that on your computer, I'll just show you it's very quick and easy to download it. You can just Google Adobe Acrobat, make sure you come up with a legitimate Adobe site and download Acrobat Reader, the free PDF viewer, and it's that easy to download. Great. So next, I'm going to talk about downloading the reference guide for bows and instruments. These are some documents that the Alliance has created, and it lists a lot of different materials and their scientific names and countries of harvest. And I'll show you how to download those. You'll go to the Alliance-International website. It's alliance-international.org. This is the homepage. And you'll go to Documents. And first we'll go to bow documentation. We'll download the bow reference guide. And you'll go to the bottom link, download reference guide for bow materials. And it may take you to this, where you can download it further to your computer and save it. And then back on the Alliance International website at Documents, you can go to Instrument Documentation. And we also have a reference guide for instrument materials. You can download in just the same way and save to your computer. Great. So now I'll just show you a quick overview of these documents. As I mentioned, they list the common name, the species and genus, the country of origin, CITES status in some cases, and the IUCN Red List status. So for example, we have the materials for the stick, and here for the frog, and you'll see that sauna wood has been highlighted in green. That is certified sustainable wood. And for the winding tip plate and button, the grip, we have a whole bunch for that. And the slide and dot. And other miscellaneous such as the horsehair, such. This is the reference guide for instrument materials. It's much less robust. We had to prioritize the bow list because of CITES. So the instrument guide needs more expansion. So if instrument makers have materials that you use and it's not listed on here, we can let us know and we could update it. And these are documents that we're updating regularly. So again, if there's any on the bow one or the instrument one that we have not listed, just let us know and we can add that in. So next we have a document of materials for both instruments and bows. And I'll show you how to download those again from the Alliance International website. So you'll go to Documents. First, we'll do the bow one, bow documentation. I'm going to download the document for bow materials and save that to your computer. You definitely want to save it to your computer and not fill it out within the web browser. And the same for instrument documentation, the documentation of instrument materials, PDF. And you'll want to save that to your computer as well. Great. So now I'll show you how to fill out this document that we just downloaded for both the instruments and bows. The one thing that you'll need for these is your logo file in a JPEG or a PNG file. Those are common picture files. Okay. So you'll open up Adobe Acrobat, and the free version is fine once again, and you'll open the files that we just downloaded. So I have the bow materials one, and this is what that looks like. And first we'll make a template. So you can click to add your logo, and it's helpful if the file name has logo in it because you can just search logo and that pops up. And then you can fill out your contact information over where it says Maker Expert. And then you can save this. You do save as to make it a template, so you don't have to fill that out every time. And at the end of the file name, just write template. Then when you go back in, that material will all be there. And then let's say you start putting in information for a customer, for Jane Doe. You'll save that as again, and select where you want to save it. And maybe put her name at the beginning of the file name and delete template at the end. And this will make two separate files. So when you go back and you open the one we just did, so the customer's one is there and the template is still there. So now let's fill it out. So we have the customer information there, the contact information. And then for this bow, we'll want to click there to add a photo of the head. Go to your photos. And then there to add the frog end photo. And then over on the right, you can type the type of bow. This is a violin bow, the year made, stick length. And then identifying marks, you can put branded John Smith, for example. And we have some blank lines at the bottom. This is a good place to write made with pre-2007 Pernambuco. That's good information to have on there if that's the case. At the bottom of the page, we have these toggle menus, and you can select that material that you saw in the materials reference guide. And you can use the slider at the right to go down. The leather, I'm going to select goat leather, and where it says write in country of harvest, you can click on that, delete that, and just write in the country. And the ebony, that might be information that you got from the PPQ 505 or from your distributor in the US or your inventory. And so this is just a nice way to have all that information in one place for the customer. Now, if you click on signature, you can digitally sign. So you can create a new digital ID and go through the prompts. Add your name and email address. And you'll create a password, and you might want to write this down because my computer didn't let me save it, and you'll need it in just a second. So now you enter the password that you just created. And this is as good as signing by hand. And it'll ask you to save as. And then you can put the date. So now I'll show you the instrument documentation. So this is the documentation of instrument materials. It's very similar to the bow one, as your information there, the maker expert, the owner information, your logo. So you can do the same thing with the template. And then you can click there to add a front photo of the instrument and the scroll photo, for example, and the back photo. And the same on the right, type of instrument, year made, body length, identifying marks or labels. And then we have more toggles. And if there's a material that's not there, you can always do other and just write in the material. And I won't go through all these, but these are just a few for the back and ribs. And you'll see over at the right, it says sustainable wood certification number and certifier. If you don't have that, you can leave it blank, but hopefully in the future, that'll be more common. That might be like an FSC certified wood. And you can digitally sign the exact same way. So this is good to encourage customers to save this doc once you give it to them and keep it in a safe place, and send a copy to the insurance company as well. So just a review of what we talked about so far. Lesser value student instruments and bows, describe the common name on the sales receipt. Higher value instruments, you can use that documentation with photos. Species information is to be passed down to the buyer from either the Lacey Act, PPQ 505, or from your inventory. And musicians will need help documenting species for additional CITES permitting reasons, like a musical instrument certificate. So there's going to be musicians coming to you for information and documentation. And in this case, verbal appraisals are not adequate. The League of American Orchestras will soon be linking the Federation to their membership as those in the music world most qualified to fill out these forms. So be prepared for that. Lynn?
Okay, thank you. That's terrific. We all have wood. So this is about our existing stockpiles of wood, and this is an important conversation. We all have wood and other materials in our shops that we've had for a long time. Most invoices are gone because we threw them away when they weren't required for tax purposes anymore. but we still can do an inventory. And it's critically important that all of us do. Sometimes we think of doing an inventory as a Pernambuco problem, but every time you see Pernambuco or hear me say Pernambuco, I want you to say, and other species, including and especially ebony, because that is so close to the brink of CITES listings and increased requirements. So having wood is one thing, doing an inventory is now the best way to protect this valuable wood for your future and for generations to come. Brianna will now show you how to do an inventory.
Great, thank you. So the first step is download the inventory form that we have again on the Alliance International website. So once again, you'll just go to that web page and it'll be under Documents, Bows and Bow Wood Inventory, and then download Bow Wood Inventory PDF. And you'll want to save that to your computer. Okay. So next, I'll talk about doing an inventory of the wood, including accounting for waste wood. Before we talk about the form, and this will be listed in the instructions for the form, but you'll want to count up your boards, your blanks, and blocks of all the different woods you have. And you'll want to weigh some small, medium, and large pieces to estimate the total weight in kilograms. And you'll also want to photograph your wood. So you'll go back to Adobe Acrobat and you will open up the inventory form you just downloaded. This is what the form looks like. So you can put in your contact information just like on the documentation forms that we used. And you can save this one as a template as well if you need, but I don't see that being you're pretty much just going to do this one and update it as you go. Put your phone number. And email. And then once again, you can add your logo. Okay, so now we'll get down to the main part of the form. We have these toggles, and I'll zoom in a little bit here. And we have some different stick woods listed. And so for this maker, John Smith, he has some Pernambuco. So he's going to select that. And he's going to enter in the number of boards that he counted up and the total weight of the boards in kilograms. And then the number of sticks that he has and the total weight in kilograms. And then he's going to put the date that he purchased these. And he'll say sales invoice for the documentation. If you don't have that, you can write unavailable. And then he has some waste wood from when he cut up some of the wood. So just write waste wood in front of Pernambuco. And then he had some sticks that were unusable for bows. He writes the weight. And he bought that at the same, that was from that same purchase. So I'll just put that same date and sales invoice. If that's all the stick woods that you have, you can select all and delete. So you right click, select all and delete. For frogwoods, he has some ebony from Cameroon and he has these in blocks. So list that and the weight in kilograms. And again, date purchased. If you have a sustainable wood certification number and certifier, you can add that there, but if not, that's okay. You can do that. It's just sales invoice and the date. And if he has another type of ebony, maybe Mauritius ebony, we'll put how many blocks he has of that and the weight in kilograms and the date that he bought that. And that's all that he has for frogwood. So he'll right click, select all, and just delete. Now on the next page, you can put in the photos that you took of your wood. Browse, go to your photos. And then there's a photo of his Pernambuco. And you can date stamp it there. That's important. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then he has a picture of some ebony with the date stamp. The next page is a page that you will fill out with the notary, and you'll get this notarized. And the following page is the instructions that I mentioned at the beginning. So one note about the date stamp. When you take a picture of your phone, for example, if you have an Android phone, know that if you go to your camera and in the settings, and you scroll to watermark, you can add in that date stamp. On the iPhone, I've not found a way to do this without a third-party app. So you may have to download something from the App Store, but I have heard you can use the Canva app, for example, to add that date stamp. And there isn't an inventory for instrument woods yet. That will be coming soon, and it'll have blank lines. It won't be so specific since there's so many different species. I'll pass it back to Lynn.
Yeah, I would like to just say for the instrument makers, even though there's no form available, these forms have been vetted through CITES, and this information, whether it be the number of boards, weight in kilograms, photographing wood with the date stamp, and doing regular updates, this is all information that is required. So again, thinking of that ebony, but you can do this just on a piece of paper if you choose to do it that way. So I'm recommending to everybody that we do inventories of our wood. I think it's just incredibly important. Also, we received information back in 2007 from Fish and Wildlife, our CITES management authority here in the US, that there was no need to mail this to anyone. They wanted us to keep our own records. And so this is for you to keep in a safe place so that you can update it regularly. Now, funny, in 2007, we weren't told to update regularly. It just didn't enter the conversation, I guess. So I did all my inventory and I had it notarized, put it in the envelope and saved it with my photographs. And I never thought about it again until 2022. And in 2022, our person at Fish and Wildlife said, and have it updated regularly. And I went, oh, I hadn't even thought of that. So I hadn't done an update between 2007 and 2022, but I think it would make a lot more sense if we just use this information on our first inventory as our baseline. And then if you're me and you're getting to the end of your career, you're not going to be buying new stuff. You will just be using up what you have. And so you would be selling a certain number of bows per year, which would reduce the inventory of bow sticks and frog blanks. And that I do at the end of the tax year when I'm adding up all my tax papers, putting that together, and just making a quick inventory adjustment, having it notarized, and that's my update. So I'm doing that this year for the first time, and I encourage maybe every 2 years for that, every 1 or 2 years, depending on how busy you are. We don't have factories, so we don't use big amounts of wood. So protecting your wood for future use, this is really incredibly important. We're all going to be passing this wood on to some other maker, somebody who's going to be able to take this wood, and we want them to be able to have all the information that they need. There will always be, I think, increasing regulations on these wood species. And so just to protect yourself, it's very important that we have the most amount of information that we possibly can. And now we have the information needed for musicians, traveling orchestras, and insurance companies. And so we're getting this information and the requirements for this information from all directions. And we really need to work cooperatively with the musicians and the orchestras. they're having a tough time now trying to go back in time and try to document. And that's a real problem. Demonstrate to CITES a voluntary traceability and legal use of species for our trade. I think that in the most recent CITES report written by a scientist in Brazil on the traceability of Pernambuco, she liked very much what she saw. She had high praise for the work of the Federation. Thank you all for that, for making sure that members knew that we did not, would not, could not support any kind of illegal activity, and that we wanted to find ways that were sustainable and legal. And how do we best trace that wood? So she went into great detail in that report about how to make this work. And that's going to be the subject of our next and last lunch with Lacey. For right now, though, let's talk about that inventory and making it work for you. So that's the end of our talk today. And let's just pull the slides down and open this up for conversation.
Does anyone have any questions? I don't see any hands up. Do
I
you?
see Peter asking, how should we best document information about pieces of wood from salvage?
I see you, Ryan.
Yeah, so we don't, we're not the police, but what I think is best is just to fully document whatever you have, whatever the source, write it down. You know the story of that wood, you know the story of your wood. And I think it's just very important for you to keep that in this. So if you're filling out an inventory sheet, that's one piece of paper that will be in the file. Your photos will be in the file as well. And then I think you need to record, you need to document, you need to write down where that wood came from and your recollections of who you purchased it from, when you purchased it. If it was salvage wood, that's very important to mention. Where it came from within the country or outside of the country. So whatever you can document is going to be to your benefit as you're moving forward. Any
Lynn,
other
I have a
questions?
question about the instrument and bow certificates to give people.
Yeah.
When you're filling them out, is it, well, I guess there's two questions. One, what do you do if you're not sure? Because I guess, I mean, if I make the instrument or bow, I could probably suss that out. But if it's something that it's an old extant instrument, then what? You know, like tips. I'm not super great at telling whether something is elephant ivory or mastodon ivory or mammoth ivory on a tip. So is it better to, we don't want to guess and be wrong. Is it better to leave it blank? I don't know. Is there any guidance on what we should do there? Or if it could be multiple species, like, you know, I can tell you that it's maple, but I don't know exactly what species of maple is on that. It could be a couple of things, right?
Yeah, I think filling out these documents requires expertise, and I certainly wouldn't be able to sit down and write a document on a violin. I might be able to say maple also, but I wouldn't do it. And I wouldn't lie. We're not here to make up stories about this. And this document is not a legal document. This is a guide. This is a guide for the musician. I think it's totally okay on here to say unknown source or to say on a date of manufacture or the date an instrument was made. To say circa, so that you're falling within a range, perhaps. But I also think it's very important if you don't know to say no, to say I'm not qualified to do that. If person brought me an instrument, I would have to send it to another source because I wouldn't have the expertise to be able to do that. And again, when it comes to ivory tips, that's very important information for anybody who's traveling. So when it's really essential for traveling, we need to be absolutely certain that we're not not making things up or stepping into that gray area. I would send that to somebody else if I didn't know for sure what the circumstances were. Again, this is information that the musicians are going to carry with them. They're not going to hand it to anybody at the border because that is not required at this point in time. If they do have CITES listed species that require a musical instrument certificate, then they're going to have other documentation. They're going to have to go through certain ports of entry and exit. They're going to have to buy new musical instrument certificates every few years and perhaps have things updated at that time if a tip changes or a whalebone wrap changes or something. But that's a different situation. This is just for the general public. It's for reassurance for all those musicians who now are scared to death to travel because they don't want to have things confiscated or broken or lost. And for insurance companies who also do not want things broken or lost. There are insurance policies these days that cover this sort of situation for the first time ever. And they're being very, very careful to make sure that musicians know their materials and have shared that information with the insurance companies. So this is something that the musician will have in their case. If they're passing through the border and the border crossing guard says, what kind of wood is that? Most musicians wouldn't know and would panic at that situation. So this is a document that they can pull out and they can share the species information with the person asking the question, which is usually reassuring to the musician. It's reassuring to whoever's asking the questions because most of them are also not experts on these species. And then what we've seen is that most people are just able to pass on. So it's a preliminary step between musicians not knowing anything with all instruments and bows at risk and the CITES musical instrument certificate, which is a much stricter, much more controlled document that is a legal document. So it's an intermediary step, and it's part of the Know Your Bow campaign that is so essential for musicians to start to realize that they're using these precious resources and that there are responsibilities that go along with that. I should also say that with the CITES musical instrument certificates, that is a really challenging. You have to know a lot about CITES regulations, which is a very detailed and complex series of source codes. And there are countries out there, like Australia, that do not honor the musical instrument certificates, which I find really shocking. So if there comes a time when people are unable to travel internationally without musical instrument certificates, I think musicians are just going to avoid Australia and New Zealand completely. They'll just write those countries off the map because it won't be safe for them to travel there. So challenging thought, very challenging for orchestras, for traveling orchestras these days. And so this is just a way of helping out. People will be coming to you for guidance. In the past, they might have known what they bought, when they bought it. They might have some certification, maybe they don't. Most people don't have a lot of paperwork. And if they do, they don't know where it is. So this is something that they need to keep with their important papers.
I think Matt Whaling has his hand up.
Where are you, Matt?
Here I am. Thanks for doing these. This is great. I have questions about, I went out the other day and looked at the forms for doing an inventory. There were a couple questions I have about that. First of all, there were I think there were places for 4 photos.
Yep.
And I want to know is it possible for one to do more than those 4 photos? Because I have wood in a whole bunch of different locations. And then kind of tagging on with this, it's sort of like it looked like you had sort of like, here's my line for Pernambuco purchased on such and such a date. And I assume I would need to do a different line for Pernambuco purchased a year later, a year after that. So I'm going to need individual photos, I would think, for all those different batches, which, by the way, I can't unsort from my wood piles, but that's a different question. So is there a way to add more photos than just those 4?
Oh, absolutely. I think you just have to think of these forms as a guide, but this doesn't need to be the whole thing. And there are other species too. There are people who are working with the snakewood. There are people that are working with Wamara or Ipe. There are lots of other woods that are being used. So what's most important, and again, I just have an envelope, and this is where my Lacey log and everything else that I think is important to the future of my business and eventually selling my wood to others in the business. All of the information that I think will be required. I have about 12 pictures in there. And so they're just in the envelope and with my date stamp, which I was so pleased to find on my phone. I didn't know a thing about it. But so I was just able to take screenshots and put them in there. I have photos from 2007. I have photos from 2022 as well. And so you can add as much to your envelope as you want. And I would list all of your wood, and I would list as best as possible your sourcing for it, when you bought it, where you bought it, that sort of stuff. Whatever you can document about your wood is very important. Many people do not have invoices. That was the picture that Brianna created is a perfect situation for people who keep papers from 2007. Most people don't. So we live in a world that has this musical instrument world where there's very little documentation of the source of the materials, of what the materials are for the musicians. And so all of this work with Lacey, with EUDR, with the CITES work, all of this is requiring a much higher level of information going forward. And I think it's very important for you to just do the best you can with the documentation that you have.
And I'll just add one thing about the technical aspects of that. One thought that I had is you're going to be printing this out to take to the notary anyway. Maybe you download and have a couple copies of the inventory and you can fill out, one page and fill that up and then have the next one with the other wood. And then you'll have multiple pages for the pictures. And then it doesn't matter if it's all one document on the computer since you'll print it out and just have the one page for the notary. That might be a way to do that.
Was there another piece of your question too that I've forgotten, Matt?
No, that's great. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Well, I mean, actually, it kind of goes along with that. I, you sort of had a line in that inventory saying, here's a bunch of Pernambuco bought in 2004. Excuse me, how many lines do I really need to take up with individual years purchased, particularly since I'm one of those people who don't have receipts? As other people will vouch, Al didn't give a lot of receipts.
Would you just, instead of thinking about the form and the limitations of the form, start with just a scratch pad and just count? So you're just going to count the number of sticks, divide it up in piles so you know the different sources. Divide it up in piles, count it, weigh it. Boards are different than sticks. And just do your inventory in that way on a separate piece of paper. It doesn't have to be on this document is meant to help, particularly important for the updates, because then you can just go on there and just make a few changes unless you're selling lots and lots of bows. But I think we have a very limited market of instruments and bows in our country. We have no factories. And I think each year we'll be able to count the numbers easily and make the updates. And using that form for the updates sounds like it would be just perfect for you, Matt. Maybe it's not a perfect fit for you when you're doing your inventory for the very first time. But I think everyone needs to do the inventory of all the species that you're using. We're all going to need it for now and in the future. And someone just asked, I think it was Tom Crone that just asked, why do we need to weigh it? Well, that's a really important question because we need to be able to know the amount of waste. We need to be able to account for the wood. So we have the amount of wood that we're starting with, and this will all be discussed next week. I'd like to show you a very detailed and simple way of being able to analyze this. We start with a board. From that board, which we've labeled, we cut however many blanks we're cutting out of it. Those two will be labeled. When we take the board in its original weight and we subtract the bow blanks that we've cut out of it and what's left over, that's the waste. So the waste and the bow blanks combined should equal the weight of the board. And that is what will be required. So waste is an essential part of that. And that would be true for instrument woods as well. And certainly keep thinking ebony, ebony, ebony.
There's another question in the chat from Andrew Dipper. How should
Yes.
we document recycled ebony material, strips or veneers cut from old fingerboards, etc.?
Oh, I think it's great to use that old ebony, and I would just call it that. I would call it recycled. And I don't know, there's no way, unless you know how to date it, I would just call it recycled ebony.
See that Cameron has his hand up, and then
I think Young, I just wanted to respond to Young quickly, and then I'll get to Cameron. Thanks.
Oh, Cameron, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask if there were, since we know that the musical instrument passports are, much more highly technical documents and require a lot more, are there shops or resources that we can send musicians or players to get that taken care of as a service? Do we know if there are specific, people who are taking on that sort of thing?
There certainly are, and I will ask that information of Heather Noonan at the League of American Orchestras and get that for you for next week. I don't have that information right now.
Okay,
But that's a good question. Of course, we want the information to be as accurate as possible. Young.
So anyway, thank you to all, and Brianna and Lynn. It's fantastic. I would just like to make a couple of comments. We're going to be going into a very busy time now until the next CITES meeting, which is in November. Some of us, Lynn, I think in this group, and there's a few others, and we're very involved in this meeting. We're collecting information. We're with meetings every week, I can say, around the world with various colleagues, CITES people who work in CITES who actually do know CITES extremely well. So I think there could be a lot of rumors that might be flying around in the next 6 to 7 months, and I would tell everybody to sit tight, and we will try to keep you informed as accurately as we can. I'm actually hopeful we might be able to work this thing out with Pernambuco, but we'll see what happens.
Meanwhile, I think it's just so important for us with all of the woods that we use. This is a time where we're changing not just what we use, but how we use it. And so no matter what species we're using, I'm hoping that there will be a time in the future when we can be reassured that the woods that we're using are legally harvested, that they're sustainably harvested. We don't want to just use woods blindly or use them as we have evaluated them, just as we have evaluated them in the past, where we evaluated the quality or the straightness of the grain or the density, whatever we used for those sorts of aspects of playability are certainly critically important. We want an industry that continues to make the finest quality instruments and bows. We don't want to lose that tradition. However, we also need to be part of this bigger world where we are respectful of the countries where our species come from, that we are actively involved in conservation, and that we are using materials in a responsible way and passing the information to the musicians who are going to hopefully continue to travel around the world and bring their music everywhere they go. So we've got lots of work to do. Peter, did you have another question?
Yeah. Thanks for
Hi.
doing this. This is kind of mind-blowing, and a little intimidating, but I'm really appreciative of all the work that you guys are putting in. I'm wondering if anyone out there has any direct experience with wood identification services or like aging and dating services like C14. And so I wouldn't, if I look into that, I wouldn't necessarily be reinventing the wheel. Just wondering if anyone in the trade has looked into that before or employed those services. That's all.
I have not looked into them, but I know that that kind of in this report that was written for CITES on the traceability, how was it possible to be able to trace wood? There was mention that there were new scientific ways to be able to for people to be able to identify the woods. And so I think we're just at a place now where this is a time of change. And I think all of those identifying scientific methods are going to come to light. The EUDR is going to be pushing this forward hard because they're going to be demanding georeferencing on all of the woods that come into the country. And so this is going to be a time of great change. And I think the scientific methods are going to be an important next step. So as we learn about those things, we'll be able to pass them on to you. And hopefully we'll all learn from them. Tom, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. Well, again, just to echo Peter, I think all the work you and Brianna and others have done is really terrific. I am feeling a little discouraged, and I'm not saying that to be cynical, but maybe others might be feeling similarly with the levels of complexity in all this. And I want to get back to this weighing question because I maybe misunderstood with the bow wood that you were weighing boards that might have multiple bows within each board. With instrument wood, it comes in a different form. And it just seems an enormous task to weigh each piece and track and do all this number crunching. I just want to understand this a little better. If it is what it is, okay, but I don't know how it translates from the bow boards to, weighing each individual scroll block and keeping track of how much it weighs before and after.
Yeah, I get it. I understand that that's an issue for all of us because this is certainly change and we've never done anything like this before. I had a granddaughter who did all of this stuff for me, and I think we need to remember that we're all busy people, and maybe it just means hiring somebody to come in for a couple of hours and just jot down. You can point and let somebody else do all the writing or do all the organizing of the wood, and then have documentation of what you have for wood. I don't think any of us have massive supplies of wood, and so there might be a numbering system that you could use, or maybe a numbering system that someone else in the group could come up with. So if we put our heads together and just say, okay, it's really important that we document this information. How are we best going to make this work? How are we going to share this? That, to me, we have responsibilities as individuals, but we also have responsibilities within our organizations. And that would be a tremendous contribution if somebody could just say, hey, I'm going to number these. And we'll talk about that in our next and last lunches with Lacey, because there are a few of us that came up with some, not me, these were ideas that came to me that are so simple and organized, and were actually listed in detail in this report that was created for CITES, because it seemed such an effective method, and it was a method that she was encouraging people to do everywhere around the world, to have some uniformity to that.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand why it matters to weigh the wood. I mean, why does it matter how much waste there is from a bow? Or, I mean, from any of these pieces of wood.
Could I just stop you right there? Because there's a really important answer to it. Because of fraud and corruption, and people switching wood, and just saying, we have to be able to document that the wood that we start with and the wood that we make the instrument with are the same wood. And the same is true with bow making. We have to just find ways to be transparent with the materials that we're using. And so I always go back to the EUDR man who said, it doesn't matter whether it makes sense or not, you just have to do it. And I think we're at that place with these. There are people who deal with wood species all the time, who have told us that tracing waste is an essential part of finding legality within our industry and within all wood species, not just instrument making. It's what we need to do right now.
Tom, I think
that doesn't mean, Tom, you don't need to do this for every single instrument or bow you're doing. I'm thinking for a situation, if you selected the wood that you're going to use for the next 6 months and did an inventory on it. So rather than looking at this whole massive picture that's making you feel depressed and stressed, if you broke it into a small chunk, but did the same thing, counted it, figured out where it was, where it came from, how much it is, write it down, have it notarized. So all the same information, I think, might be very important.
I did an inventory years ago for insurance purposes.
Perfect.
So, I didn't weigh the wood, and so not to focus too much on that, but the question about what's the purpose is really what I'm trying to come to terms with.
Yeah, that's true. And we have to be guided by people who have a lot more experience than we do, and in all of these issues and all of the laws. So I think it's important for us to be cooperative and do the very best we can. And so I'm going to encourage you to do the very best you can. And I encourage all of you to do that as well. It's different. It's really different. I appreciate that. I'm open for questions any old time. Anybody can call me anytime.
Lynn,
and I'm happy to answer. Go ahead, Young.
So,
Lynn hit on something for a little bit, which it's hard to understand if you're only in the bow world or the violin world. A lot of these actions and decisions that are being implemented is not aimed just at the violin bow business or the instrument business. Mm-hmm. It's the totality in the world of the big wood sellers. They themselves who get the wood, who are coming under pressure. So when these big organizations, there's like 24, 25 big companies in the world, they themselves are hiring people to go out and give these talks about, hey, this is what's going on. This is what's coming. We don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
So, but I think, Tom, you need to think that in a broader sense. And I feel your pain, and I share many of the sentiments that you express, but you need to think this in a broader way, that what is going on. And when this EU aspect comes in, I'm sorry, it's going to make the Lacey Act look like ice cream. This is very severe, and there's no turning it back. They delayed the EU thing for 1 year. They're in such an uproar.
Yeah. Well, that's helpful to hear, and it makes some sense to put it in that context. It makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
To put it in that context. It is a rather punitive approach to the small end users like us and musicians, when really the violators of these that have created this situation are much bigger fish.
Always the case.
Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely. But I also think that we are the ones that have the direct link to the musicians, more so than any of the big factories anywhere. We're the ones that have the link to the musicians. They are the ones that are going to need our support if music will be allowed to continue and travel around the world. It enhances everyone's lives, but it's not a given that musicians will be able to continue to travel. That's something that we need to preserve. That is something so precious, and we all need to play a role in that. We're creating and restoring, maintaining the instruments and bows that those musicians are using. So we have a big responsibility, not just to laws and regulations, and we need to know those and we need to abide by them, but we also have this other very precious commodity of music around the world, and we need to guard that as best we possibly can. That's a nice place to end.
Perfect.
I'll see you all next week. It'll be a very interesting final talk, and hopefully, Tom, it will encourage all of you to just stop everything and rush into your wood stocks and do inventories. If not, at least we'll remind you one more time of why it's so important. So take care, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you.